Hi students, in this video we will continue looking at this demographic transition model. We were in the late expanding stage 3 when we ended the other video, so let's pick up there. So remember that this version of the demographic transition gives some information down here at the bottom that gives you a description of, say, the natural increase rate, which is represented by the red line, or the birth rate. Is it high? Is it low? Is it falling? How quickly? That kind of thing. But also, even though originally the demographic transition model was based on observations made about population, industrialization, food supply, and data from England, this is used to predict the future, like number 5. Do you see the 5th stage over here with the question mark in here? So this is even used to predict maybe what's going to happen in the future with population stabilization, decline, and those population pyramids that you see getting smaller and smaller at the bottom. So that's like a population decline. So anyway, please, make note of these issues here. So the natural increase rate is increasing because in stage 3 because the birth rate is remaining high but falling rapidly, but also the death rate continues to fall and starts to stabilize down toward the bottom. It falls more slowly, but it continues to fall, and then you see it stabilize as it goes on into stage 4. So one of the main reasons why this industrialized agriculture climate that occurred in stage 3, one of the reasons why you see the death rate go down, I mentioned before, food security is certainly one of them, but because fewer and fewer people needed to be involved in agricultural production, and instead machines were doing the work that human beings used to need to do, you could focus on other pursuits such as science, such as medicine, such as any other kind of pursuit, religion even. But you saw fewer and fewer children being needed in the labor force because mechanization of labor meant that machines were taking over the need for children to be born. And so you saw this significantly decline, and this line here between 3 and 4 represents around the year 1900, where you see really rapid birth rates, crude birth rates declining significantly for a number of reasons. Birth control methods were more widely in use, and the status of women, most claim the status of women was elevated in society, although there are some good arguments against that too, since women had to go into the workforce the same as men, although a lot of women say that we want to. And so that was certainly possible in stage 4 of demographic transition, where you've got that increased you've got advancement in medical science and the ability to keep people alive, and you've got a lot of extra time in a day to focus on other duties instead of agricultural pursuits because of the mechanization of agriculture and so many other aspects of life. Transportation and the steam engine that came in around Queen Victoria's age, and how it spread really enabled globalism to take off. Really the end of the Industrial Revolution there. Okay, so if you look at examples of where these things exist around the world, currently they would say that just a few remote groups around the world could be classified as stage 1. And there are many of the lower income nations, very high population, low income nations in Africa that fit into the stage 2 of demographic transition. Brazil in South America is used here as an example of late expanding. So we're on the decline there as industrialization and personal wealth goes up. Poverty diminishes slowly. People are still extremely impoverished in Brazil, and we're going to use a city in Brazil, a small town actually in Brazil, as an example of how development or urban planning can affect these disease rates. There is improved medical care in stage 3. Fewer children are needed for the worker force, that, as it says down here, but you end up also with an issue of what is a child for. You see a cultural shift because children used to have that significant socially important role to play in society. And you see a shift in the attitudes toward children also. They aren't needed for a productive purpose in the household or in society. And so the shift changes, and you get things like the terrible twos and toddlers and tweens and adolescents and all of these different kinds of life stages where we describe children or childhood that didn't exist before. Children become less important in the economic system, and therefore their status really goes down. They have less of a contribution to society overall. And so that's one of the reasons why in stage 4 you see a very sharp decline in that natural birth rate increase. It's a low, crude birth rate. And stage 5, this declining population, world population, which some people, it used to be speculative. So if you have the 11th version of our textbook, I believe in the 10th at least, maybe even the 11th, you saw a demographic transition graphic that did not even include a stage 5. If you do a search on Google for demographic transition model and look at images, you will see probably about 2/3 of them have a stage 5 now, but you'll still see lots of pictures where it just has 1 through 4, because it was commonly believed that stage 5 did not occur yet. The example of stage 5 that this graphic gives is Germany. And so this is when the population, which has been dominant in the geopolitical makeup of a country, the population that has occupied that country for a good 500,000 years, in the case of Germany, when that population begins to decrease, then that is a declining population. When the crude death rate exceeds the crude birth rate, you have fewer people being born to replace those people who are dying at the same rate as before. And so we see this happening in a lot of places around the world. Japan is one of those places that in this graphic, it's listed as a low stationary growth rate or increase rate. But actually, in most documentation that I see now with new census numbers, it puts Japan over here in the declining category, because for so long the government of Japan was completely opposed to any kind of immigration whatsoever. Now, there's a word that we're going to look at significantly next week. We're going to look at population dynamics, push and pull factors of migration, because that is a significant factor in population growth or decline. At least it can be. This particular graphic and the concept of demographic transition does not take into effect or into account immigration into or out of a place. Okay, migration into or out of a place. We have some vocabulary words that we'll go over when we get to those topics. So this is just about the populations that pre-existed any kind of influx of migrants or refugees or any of the dynamics that you see of human movement across, geography, across geopolitical borders that you see today for different reasons of exile, famine, persecution. Root causes of migration, like we hear our presidential administration talk about. These kinds of root causes of migration are going to be push or pull factors to bring people in or get people out. They're in their decision-making process to leave or stay, and where to go if you're going to leave. So this particular birth rate, death rate, you don't see a migration rate here. And so the economic condition, the political condition, lots of different conditions can factor into whether there is a heavy migration rate into or out of specific areas. These numbers don't reflect that. Okay, so this just shows like if all things were left alone and borders were secure, so to speak, and people didn't come in or out, what would the growth rate or the growth or the decline? Would it be a negative natural increase rate or a positive natural increase rate for populations moving forward? For your reaction paper, it might be interesting to do some research and see exactly how many countries these days are considered to be in this declining category. And please note also that the reasons for, let me see, does it say here? Oh, it doesn't say here on this graphic anything about pandemics, but let me make this a little bit smaller and show you in comparison with this epidemiologic transition. Let me just get this here, try to rearrange this so you can see how it lines up. Let's see. Okay, so I'm trying to get stage 1 aligned with stage 2 down here, so that's what I'm resizing really quick. But if you look at this epidemiological transition, let's see. In these stages, so this refers to, it's kind of like an overlap. If this was old times, like in the 1990s and I was doing this, I would have like an overhead transparency that I could put on, overlap onto the demographic transition model. But this predominantly addresses the medical situation and the reasons for such a high crude death rate and for a decreasing crude death rate over the stages. So in stage 1 and stage 2, you see that basic things like sanitation and nutrition problems were what contributed to a very high crude death rate at first, and then improvements in sanitation and nutrition at the end of stage 2, it led to a decreasing crude death rate. So you saw people living longer into later stages of their lives, their life expectancy, or the period of time when a human being was anticipated to live increased because the crude death rate lowered. You had lower maybe infant mortality or child mortality, but infectious diseases such as cholera, like some of you watched in the cholera video for Project 1, kept population with a very high crude death rate. In stage 3, like we said previously, when you had fewer people who had to devote their labor to the food supply, then you could devote to other things like scientific research and medical research. And so here you could get rid of or teach people how to control or protect themselves from these infectious diseases. But chronic diseases, man-made diseases, in other words, kind of took their place. And so when food security became part of your everyday life, people started putting on weight and developing diabetes, which is a man-made, mostly it's a man-made, type 2 diabetes anyways, is a man-made disease, heart disease, these kinds of things that you see here, obesity, all of these diseases that we know of well in our stage 4 existence are man-made. We do it to ourselves. Sedentary lifestyle, eating the wrong food, eating too much food, carrying too much weight, such as me, those kinds of things. We create these diseases for ourselves, but they can be treated. And so life expectancy can still last well into our 80s or 90s in the United States. There are these places around the world called blue zones. You could look that up also if you'd like to for a reaction paper, an outside source. A blue zone is typically characterized by long lifespan. I think Greece is one of them. Japan is one of them. They have a wonderful Mediterranean or North Pacific diet, and because of their lifestyle, they have a significantly increased lifespan. Into the 100s is not a fit 100-year-old is not unusual in those kinds of blue zones. So that might be interesting to see. Also, as you look at other epidemiologic transition models here, well, it says here clearly that there's a resurgence of infectious diseases because of globalization. And so what are we looking at right now with a SARS-CoV-2, otherwise known as COVID-19? It is an infectious disease that, why are we dealing with it? Because of globalization, because of the ability for human environment interaction, movement of things like a pathogen from one place on the globe to the next. So investigate some of this for your action paper this week. I think that's my suggestion to you, and text me with any questions. I will see you again for more geography lessons really soon.